I got a chance to catch up with Shreff again, and we had a great talk. Covered a lot of subjects like dissemination and the church and takeover of the church and what the future is. Does the church have any future? What's the field like? Does the field have a future? What should we be doing? That type of thing. So stay tuned and be sure to become a patron. We need your support in order to keep creating this type of content. And so thank you. Here we go.
Okay,
How
we've got
about,
it, brother. This latest link that you sent did it for us.
yeah. Well, to bring people up to date, we've had some technical difficulties, you could say. might be operator error, who knows? But anyway, you've moved continents and all kinds of things since we last talked. You sort of unceremoniously got cut off in the middle of a conversation we were having.
Might have been load shedding, which happens in Johannesburg, that where the electricity that's available to everyone is in a wave through the city, and you've got to take advantage of your life during the time the wave is lapping on your beach. Because when it sets out again, then you lose your power. But it's not happening that often. But when it happens, it's an obstruction. Anyway, good to see you, David.
Yeah, good to see you too. And I'll just bring some people up to date who may not have tuned into the previous conversation, but we were talking and chatting along, got cut off, and now you've come to the U.S. for a short period, and you're doing some, I guess, visa issues, and then you're going back to Africa. But I'll refresh your memory where we left off in just a second, but I want to get in a commercial first. This is being brought to you by Scientolopedia. Now, Scientolopedia is a very powerful resource for people interested in the subject of Scientology, and we're creating videos and podcasts and providing streaming of LRH lectures and doing a lot of work and spending money. So we need your support. You can become a patron for as little as $1 a month, or $5, $10, whatever you can do to help us out and help us create this content. End of commercial.
Excellent. Good one.
Now, so this is part two. We'll call this part two of our conversation. And people, you've told some good stories and lots of information, but where we left off, you made an interesting point, because we were talking about Leah Remini and the TV show, and how she had sort of changed from just being, complaining about the disappearance of Shelley Miscavige and some authoritarian things she was seeing with the Sea Org, to flipping to a real anti-Scientologist and the whole kit and caboodle. And your observation was there's a certain individual entered the scene about that time. So if you'd like to pick up some thoughts on that, that would be great.
Well, okay. My observation of the thing is Remini is a very sincere Italian talented actress. And she was very upset by the absence of her friend when they went to some event. And she said, where is David's wife? And apparently it was like the turd in the punch bowl. Like it created quite a wave.
Right.
And she was censured severely for it. And now she really started to be concerned about her friend Shelley Miscavige. Where is Shelley? And started to question the management of the church. And it was all about who's running the church and where is Shelley and what's going on here? And why are we being treated like this? Mind you, this had nothing to do with Scientology. This had to do with the management of Scientology, with what's going on in the church. And that is what that was. And then she started this television show and was joined by Mike Rinder. And Mike Rinder, of course, for 30 years in the church he was sort of the attack dog for international management in the church on news programs, whatever the hell he was doing. Very good at what he did as far as defending the church was concerned. But suddenly he and who was the other guy?
Rathbun.
Marty Rathbun.
Hmm.
Marty Rathbun. Both of them left. And with lots of, they were obviously very senior people and so forth. And they left and they went out into the field and But, for anybody familiar with operations of the Central Intelligence Agency, for example, they're very, very good at infiltration. Very good at infiltration. That's what they do. They go out and they topple regimes, and they are the best on the planet. My father was a physicist of some renown when he was with us. And in fact, he was the assistant to the Secretary General of NATO and the highest ranking American in the European field.
Uh-huh.
He really knew what he was talking about. And we were having a conversation one day, and he said that his opinion is that the greatest threat to American national security is the Central Intelligence Agency. These people operate in wild ways. Well, back to the present story. This is the book that Rinder and Rathbun were operating from. And of course, Rathbun did his whole thing and famously re-entered the church. He went back in. My contention is he actually never left. He went out there to do an operation. I consider that Mike Rinder did the same thing. He's out there to do an operation. And the operation that he's doing is he hooked up with Remini.
Yeah.
And suddenly her whole program was not about the Church of Scientology anymore. It was about Scientology itself, the subject itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a very different kettle of fish.
I think a lot of us noticed that shift in her focus from being a righteous, whistleblower to being just an anti-Scientology Scientologist, without any differentiation between the subject itself and the people and so forth, and just the whole thing. It's a cult, and she sort of fell in with a bad bunch. And Rinder, I agree with you. I've harped on Rinder, and anytime I've been interviewed about him, I've got some stories. Let me just give you one, because there's a connection, to the deep state, what's called the deep state and so forth. Right. I think it was around 2013. The FBI was real interested in all the shenanigans of, the whistleblowers were causing. And the story was, and this was from Rinder himself, relayed that he'd been asked by the FBI if it made sense to go in and rescue the senior citizens at the INT base. They were actually primed and ready to go in and pull some people out. And he told them, no, don't do it, because they're, they're basically Stockholm syndrome. They're not going to give or disconnect or leave for all these reasons. And to me, first of all, he's got communication with the deep state, the FBI. And number two, this is a guy that is not even a trained auditor, let alone doesn't even have a high school diploma. And he's making a diagnosis and commenting on whether or not these people could be pulled out and rescued from, if they were being abused, and if they were needed help, would they come out? So that's, a huge indicator to me that he's playing for another team. And sort of, this whole thing of the press always going to the Rinders and the Reminis and the Rathbuns and the De La Carrières and stuff. Why don't they ever talk to, some actual Scientologists, and I kind of puzzled that out for a number of years. They just keep talking to these people that hate Scientology, and the actual subject never gets an airing, never gets. So I put up a website, and we've done our bit to try to counter that narrative, you know. But I thought your observation that her shift was a very astute observation. When he entered the scene, she changed, and the whole narrative of what she was trying to do shifted to, you know, get L. Ron Hubbard, get the Scientology, the whole, you know, throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak.
Right. And this tied in very much with my own through 1999, 2000, and then I'm running up to 2010. I was starting to get these noises. Now, mind you, this is very late in the game. Some weird things have been going on, but I was not in the church at all at the time. I was touring all over the planet, doing this and that, and delivering seminars and so on. But I was back at the Sandcastle, the advanced organization, one day, walking down the hallway, which is lined with photographs of people who have donated to this International Association of Scientologists. There's no Class 8 auditors. There's no case supervisors of renown. There are no technical experts at all on these walls. In other words, Scientology is not represented at all. And I thought this was such a this is the advanced organization. And the magazines are all promoting this International Association, which honestly I didn't know anything about. But frankly, it's a distraction. The product of this whole operation is stop people from moving up this grade chart. Do not allow people to move further up the line. And of course, they attacked the most important aspect of Scientology, which was the first 28 axioms of Scientology. The first 28 axioms, which all lead up to axiom 28, which is the communication formula, the communication course. If you do not understand how to communicate, that's it, game over, and you lose. Because science as a subject is only as effective as those fundamentals are applied. So they became a direct target of this operation. They are here to wipe out the communication of its members. Now you need to do as you're told. Don't think, just behave this way. And this is so odd. When I started to look at it more closely, I realized, wow, the subject of Scientology is under attack. Never mind the Church of Scientology. That's who cares about the Church of Scientology? The only reason it's there is to effectively disseminate and distribute the technologies that Hubbard developed.
Now, didn't you say that you had heard that? Didn't you say that you had heard that they've actually stopped delivering the communication course?
Well, yeah, and that was a rumor, as I said, a complete rumor. But the truth is, I completely would go along with it, because the TR's pilot in 1979, of which I was a part, was the last piece of technology where LRH came back in as he revisited that area of the tech many times, more times than any other era, to go, why aren't people understanding the TRs? They aren't getting this. And if they don't get this, they won't get another damn thing beyond it. So in 1979, he did this pilot. And we were 9 months before we started roll-off graduates. And I was the 9th one to graduate from the pilot. The first 7, interestingly enough, being Mexicans who had arrived at the pilot with no training at all. They were green as grass, but they were gung-ho from the mission sector in Mexico. Delightful people, extroverted as hell, but with no fixed ideas or anything else about the TRs. They came in like new driven snow. Whereas the rest of us were completely bound up in the fact that we're trained auditors, we know how to do this. We've been doing TRs years. And of course we couldn't pass to save our lives because we were trying to do what we knew. It's the classic barriers to learning. Yeah. Thinking that you already know everything there is to know and not having your own purpose for studying. Of course, it's important, but I already know how to do this. For 4 months, we stumbled over that self-righteousness while these Mexicans weren't stumbling at all because they knew they didn't know. Yeah. So they went right through.
I want to just interject that people should listen to part 1 if you haven't already, because Shreff goes into more detail about that pilot. Very interesting stuff that went on with that. But yeah, the church is not delivering We've known that. People in the field have noticed that. I mean, I think it was several years ago, I heard that they had stopped the briefing course. And I knew, because I was around AOLA a lot back in the 90s and up through the 2000s. And they hadn't made a class 8 in years and years and years. And they used to crank out a lot of class 8s, you know. So, you know, that's the church. It's been infiltrated. I think Rinder is a great example, but there's others. I recently interviewed a man named Merrill Veneer, which will be on our list of interviews coming soon, but or that by the time people hear this, it'll be available. But he was a deep operative in the Guardian's office, and he wrote a book called Arrows in the Dark. But in my interview, he tells an interesting story about how during that transition period between the Sea Org taking over completely and ousting the Guardian's office, they were explicitly ordered not to any longer use Freedom Magazine or any other channels of communication to attack the FBI. No longer would the church be critical of the FBI. Now, isn't that interesting? Because the Church of Scientology was a staunch freedom fighting, corruption exposing, you know, entity. And now they're being ordered from top management of the Sea Org not to attack the FBI. So, you know, we can only deduce certain conclusions from that. We don't have any whistleblower coming out and saying, yeah, I was approached by the CIA to infiltrate and, you know, influence David Miscavige, or, you know, because they're professional liars. That's what they do. Yeah. And they don't want to come clean and tell that. But we can deduce that, you know, the Scientology was a subject of a lot of infiltration and counter ops, you could say.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, that was never my area, and it didn't. I wasn't ever really interested in it until I started to notice things like the FSM program being completely side railed, and the personality profile. You know, the OCA. That's a genius piece of technology, and it was completely wiped out in the early 80s, which we didn't know about because I was in the mission sector the whole time, and we kept using the Ray Kemp version of the profile, which was the one that LRH wanted. That was the one that was called the OCA, the so-called Oxford Capacity Analysis. But it turned out that the church had altered it completely in the early 80s. I've discovered this way up in the 90s when I was in San Francisco doing an event. I think we talked about this earlier. And
see part 1, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, it's just part 1. But so my area has always been, how can we help the greatest number of people in the shortest period of time with the minimum amount of technology? That would be fantastic. If the only thing everybody did was a good communications course, the whole planet would, you know, chill. It would settle down. But as long as these things covered on that course are not well resolved, people will flinch. They'll jump back and they'll hide. They'll register all sorts of incompetencies. So the interest was in the actual dissemination of the technology more than not defending it and all the legal stuff. And all these.
Well, just to wrap up this bit about the church, because, you know, I'm not all about the subject and, you know, the future and, you know, but people are out there and they're kind of puzzled, you know, what do some people that have been around for a while, what do they think? Was the church taken over? I got asked that on another podcast. You know, was it infiltrated was it destroyed from within or from without, you know? And so my life has not circulated around the church. I'm not that interested in it. But, you know, a lot of people are listening and want to hear your take because you've been out and about and dealing with people and you get the questions and people, you know, the reactions. So do you think there is, if the church was infiltrated, is there a redeeming characteristic or redeeming quality to the church? I always say Miscavige has to be gone. That's step 1, you know, but if it were to reform. But is it reformable, or is it just, let's get on down the road and not even contemplate? Because some people are waiting there. They think that someday the church will be better or reformed. So what's your take on that? Do you think that the church is reformable? Is it
I don't care. I don't care, because to me, the church, it was never about the church. Even when I was operating within the church, the body of the church was unimportant. As Ron said, what we're here to do is to get people up this grade chart. We're here to bring about greater ability and so forth. The church doesn't have anything to do with that except as a dissemination arm. Now it's failed to do that. I do believe that it was infiltrated. I do believe that all the attention on David Miscavige is a wrong target. David Miscavige, in my view, is a person who was handled and placed as a lightning rod on the top of the church to attract all the lightning and the thunder and all the noise. We must get David Miscavige. No, that has nothing to do with David Miscavige. He never had the power to do what has been done to that organization in terms of wiping it out, in terms of its effectiveness and so on. It's become totally ineffective as a dissemination arm of the subject of Scientology.
Yeah.
So for my interest, I have no attention in the Church of Scientology. I don't even consider that. I think it's an operation that's done by an external agency, whether it's the Central Intelligence Agency or whoever that is. It's clearly an external agent that came in, made some changes, and had the intelligence. And remember in 63, when they invaded the church, the FBI charged into Washington and to Los Angeles. They took all the materials on some trumped up charge of fraud or something, but they got all of the technical materials. And trust me, they know what they're doing. All that was turned over to the CIA. The CIA can't operate domestically. They can only operate in foreign lands.
Supposedly, but
yeah,
they haven't been doing it.
The guy got the materials, turned it over to the CIA. Now the CIA has this whole branch of people that are doing nothing but studying this technology. They know more about Scientology than many, many, many Scientologists. Because
there's an interesting story, and part of this is why they had wanted the technology, and that has to do with the remote viewing experiments. I have some inside information on that. I knew the superstar of all superstars, remote viewer, a guy named Pat Price, who was a Scientologist and an OT, along with Ingo Swann and Hal Puthoff. They were all OTs. They created that remote viewing experiments, and just in a nutshell, because I did a series of 3 podcasts on this subject a few years ago, but they were Scientologists and they were able to create some pretty startling results that were, to this day, never been duplicated as far as the rigorous scientific testing of psychic phenomena. And when you had 2 Scientologists that were able to penetrate NSA facilities and gather information, and even go beyond that, as far as overhearing or picking up on intel, basically, well, that was a huge threat. And that was also a CIA-run action. The whole remote viewing thing was funded and controlled by the CIA. Pat Price went to work for the CIA after he left the remote viewing facilities, or while at the same concurrently. So see, there's a CIA connection there. Plus, can you imagine how the deep state or the CIA would like to have this organization in existence, taking random people off the street who could be developed into world-class remote viewers and intel operatives? So they're very interested in the whole psychic phenomena. They were, in competition with the Russians. They thought the Russians were doing mind control and making inroads in this field. And there we are sitting in, right in the United States, right connected to Scientology, these guys that were getting these huge results. So that, to me, is a kind of a genesis of why Scientology had to be stopped dead in its tracks and infiltrated and taken control. Now, there may be other reasons, but I think that's the top of the list. Have you heard anything about that, or looked at that as a possibility of why the technology had to be stopped?
Again, I've certainly heard things like that around, but it's an area of zero interest for me. What I'm interested in is what aspects of the technology work invariably and always and bring about the greatest positive result in their application, and then furthering that stuff. What happened politically with the church is history, but the fact that the church is no longer a player in this game, trying to rehabilitate it or do something, it's a non-entity situation because it is not the subject itself. You've done some fantastic work with Scientolopedia on being an access channel to get this technology to actually download it onto your own computer and study it for yourself, make up your own mind about it. And that's where I want to focus my attention for the rest of this life is, here's some very interesting data. Apply this to your marriage, to the areas. In fact, what's going on in the world today? Wow, look at this political scene. How do you make sense of this? Well, it's quite simple. Here is the evaluation technology. Here is the PTS technology. What is a potential trouble source? What is an antisocial? What is the emotional tone scale, which is probably the most fascinating subject? Where do these people reside on the emotional? So how can you predict their behavior? Oh, suddenly it becomes much easier to understand all this stuff.
Yeah. The one problem I see with just abandoning the whole church thing is it's not that easy to create those facilities, where let's say you get people all hyped up, or they read Dianetics and they want to get some auditing. Well, where do you send them? Where do they go? We've got a very small network, small meaning in the hundreds, maybe 100 or so, field auditors and facilities, but it's not like having a course room where they can sit down with a dictionary and a supervisor and all those capabilities. So that's the problem I have with abandoning the church, or any hope for the church, is they've got all, God bless them for getting everybody to donate to the real estate rather than to the bridge. I'm being funny here, but the fact is they do have those facilities. So I don't know. What's your take on that idea?
Well, again, everybody can do whatever he wants to do. My view is simple programs in the field that provide results for people. Because if you suddenly say, well, what are we going to do to turn the church around? Well, first thing you got to do is remind everybody that it's been taken. Now you've got to get them all involved in some kind of a drama about now what we have to do this is, no, we're trying to rehabilitate a game that is not material. What is material is people getting results. If people are getting results and more results and more results and more results, the whole thing will be created again. We don't need to train class 5 and class 6 auditors when we could do a huge amount of good by just showing people how to book one audit. Here is the simple procedure. In a 1.5-day workshop, we'll show you how to do it. As an idea, for example, 10 people get their TRs totally in. And your exchange for that is to go out and get 10 other people to do it. 10 other people. have a program that's 10, make 10, make 10, make 10, make 10, and you have a couple of billion within weeks. Just 10, 10, 10, 10. It obviously takes more than weeks to get those communication skills, but it's working with programs that actually think in terms of numbers. It's like Ron was saying in the what was it called, proportionate marketing, when he said the greatest amount of marketing needs to be put towards new people, brand new people who know nothing about the subject. The next greatest amount of attention needs to go on people who have done a service. the next greatest amount, and the next one. And, finally you're down to the 8th greatest is the people who've actually done services and have advanced quite far on the grade chart. None of it talks about securing a church. None of it talks about the ethics level in the church required to keep this whole machine going. None of it has anything to do with it. It has to do with give results, get people to understand the text so they go, holy smokes, I can really use this in my marriage. I can really use this in my business. This is fantastic. I was doing seminars for years, going into businesses, delivering 2.5, 3-hour workshop and watching their statistics over the next 6 weeks just climb right out the roof with nothing else than by improving their communication skills. Very simple stuff. And they're all winning all the time. I don't want to get into the whole political thing and handling the ethics of it all and the drama of all this stuff. The simplicity of it is, it works. The technology works. Let people have it.
Well, you mentioned a major technology a minute ago that is almost not even heard of, and I run into a lot of people. I have a Facebook group. There's 800 and some people in it. And the majority are new people to the subject. They find it, they do a search on Facebook, Scientology, and they join the group. And it's all just about the subject, nothing about the church. I banned any conversation about the church. People go off on that and they'll just go for, they'll just go forever, but they have no clue what an eval is. And, this would be something that would, if we had people that could do evals, they could isolate, and do surveys and use some of that tech to export it in a big way. I'm thinking, football stadium type, rallies or mass media, like using people do Zoom meetings with thousands that come online for Zoom events or whatever.
Oh, really? I had no idea.
Sure. Yeah. It can handle just large quantities. And there's so blending, think smart people evaluating the situation, because we got a tough situation. This is not a normal, business dynamics type of situation. This is spiritual freedom and corrupted organization and people's dealing with their internal, life situation problems and liars all the way up and down the whole stream of information about Scientology, like we've talked about, the infiltrated thing. So it's not an easy problem to solve. How could we take it on into the future of exporting valuable information to people, giving them some wins and change their lives using this stuff? Forget about the church, but outside of the church, how could we, what would we do? And so I started talking about the eval tech. People haven't even heard of that. They don't even know this is a way of how you can dissect problems or situations and come up with a program and plans to address it. What's your experience with the eval tech and the fact that that's not in use?
Well, obviously the eval tech is magical. I've used it myself over the years. It's very effective technology. But again, I would refer to this point that when Ron was talking about these communication drills, he says, unless these exercises are well learned early on in Scientology training, supervisors at higher levels will not be teaching their subjects, but the TRs. Because what you find in evaluation, and the greatest barrier to evaluation, is that I can push your button and I can say, this is the problem. And you go, yeah, I agree with you. Wait a minute, there's no evaluation connected with that at all. People are button oriented. I know what's wrong and it's this, but all they're doing is following their own button package. And they don't even understand that evaluation technology allows you to cut through the buttons and find out what is the actual reason this problem is here. Politicians chronically use this when they use the generalities. The generality is a huge button to use in the manipulation of people. You say, what the American people want is, what kind of a generality is that? I'm an American person. That's not what I want. Who's he talking about? He's just generalizing a subject so you can't identify what is the actual problem being solved here. And they're just pushing everybody's buttons. Well, the Russians right now, we don't know anything about what the Russians are doing. We hear about it on the 6 o'clock news, and because it pushes all the right buttons, we go off with opinions that are generated by the 6 o'clock news and don't have anything to do with what's actually going on.
The term fear porn comes to mind.
Exactly. Now, South Africa, where I'm living these days, is one of the so-called BRICS nations. There's BRICS is BRICS.
Yeah.
It's Brazil, it's Russia, it's India, it's China, and it's South Africa. That is like the NATO alliance on the other side, but this is the BRICS alliance. So I have a completely different news feed than people here in the United States are operating with. I have a different look at the world, but it's all still very button oriented. Very button oriented. And of course, if your buttons are flat, you don't react to the buttons. You look at the situation, and now you can correctly evaluate a scene. Let's look at the real stuff. And you don't fall prey to the buttons. So my view on that is, let's just get the fundamentals really well understood. Because when you do that, suddenly your marriage improves. Just like it's magical. Suddenly, your whole staff is more in communication. Suddenly, things are just going much better. Gosh, we didn't even talk about that subject, and look how much better things are going.
Yeah.
Because you can handle the correct reasons why things are going off the rails.
There's going to be people, there's people listening to this and listening to you, and you're well known in the field and of Scientology. And so I think they're listening and hopefully getting some inspiration to do something or take something and run with it. But how do you start at a very grassroots? You get a couple of neighbors in your living room and you say, sit down and don't do anything, do nothing. Or do you try to go a little bit bigger and get a hall of some sort and try to promote it? And what should people do? I mean, what would you think that somebody, Joe, interested in the subject, and Joe who wants to, improve himself or help his neighbors, what the hell does he do? Does he do dynamics or?
I think that's a great question, David. I'll tell you what, the way I have approached it. I wrote a book. In fact, now I have several books in the runway, but I wrote a book called Sacrificial Branches, which I think you have on your site.
And by the way, the link to it, Amazon link, will be down below.
Great. I loved this book. This was a fantastic book because it is a memoir of the time that I spent in India. Now, I went to India as a college graduate, but absolutely green as grass Westerner. And I went into a small Indian village outside of Jaipur in Rajasthan, in the north of India. And I lived there for a couple of years and worked with the people and so forth. Now talk about buttons, talk about getting every Western fixed idea you have is just getting pummeled on a daily basis. And I have all these about all the poor Indian people. And I had all these fixed notions that were guiding my life that I realized was completely false information. And it was such a revelatory period that I went through that I finally decided, you know what, I've just got to write a memoir about this, because I came out of India asking myself the question, how would I ever tell my father what happened here? This is just a completely off the wall thing. This is not a tour bus survey of India. This is get out of the bus, go right into your face. Well, I wrote this memoir, and in the process of discovering this material again, I realized this is why when I finally left India, I went back, I lived in England for a while, and I encountered the Dianetics book. I read the Dianetics book, and the first 40 pages into that book, I answered my question. How am I going to talk to my dad about what happened in India? In the first 40 pages of Dianetics, it just blew my mind. I started using Dianetics immediately. I was visiting over in the States, and I was up on the university campus. I was auditing people right out of the book on the campus there. And one day somebody walked by and they saw this Dianetics book next to me there on where I was sitting. They said, "Oh, diuretics, you got to stay away from those people." I said, "What people are you talking about?" You know, this was back in the day when there was just a Dianetics book. There were no addresses in the back of the book. There were no centers listed any place. I said, "What people are you talking about?" They said, "Oh, up on Manal, they have a center." I said, "Thank you very much." And I got in my car and I went up to Manal and I walked into the Dianetics Center and said, "I want a copy of every book Hubbard has written since 1950. And she was like, "What?" I didn't realize this was a hard question. I said, "I've got basically a few days and I have to go back home," where I was living in Paris at the time. And I want to take a full library of his materials so I can study them in greater depth. Certainly he's written something since 1950. And so she took me down the hallway and we turned right into this bookstore with tapes and reel-to-reels and all, I mean, an unbelievable library. And I looked at her and I said, "All I want are the books written by Hubbard." And she said, "That's all we have here." And I thought I died and gone to heaven. Like, Jesus, well, okay, give me one of each of those, box them up and send them to this address. And I turned around and there was a course room right down the hall. And there are people in there busy, busy, busy. I said, "Okay, if you got a course I can do in 3 days." And she said, "You want to do a course? If I can do it in 3 days, I have to leave in 3 days. If you got a course I can finish in that period of time." And then she introduced me to another person who started giving me an introductory lecture on Dianetics. I said, "Look, I've read the Dianetics book, wonderful book. It's a wonderful talk you're giving me here. I got 3 days. Have you got a course I can do? That's my question." And she looked at my eyes and she said, "Thank you very much." And she went on with her damn lecture. I'm thinking, what in the world is going on here? These are like TRs the old way.
Yeah.
And then I finally stood up and said, "Excuse me, is there somebody else I can talk to?" And she said, "Is there a problem?" I said, "Listen, I want to do a course. I've got 3 days. Do you have a course I can do in 3 days' time?" And she said, "You want to do a course?" I thought, who are these people? My God, surely these people don't work for Ron Hubbard, who wrote this book, because the guy who wrote this book ain't taken this much time to get anything done. Come on, get me on a course. And they did. They had the comm course. And I went, they signed me up, I paid, went in and sat down and started doing the drills. I was there for 7 days. I had to change my flight, the whole thing. But as I was sitting there on that course, I thought, this is the most incredible course I've ever done. This is simple. It undercuts all the bullshit. This gets you right down to where a being lives. And after a couple of years in India, this is precisely what I needed. So I not only went back to Paris, I went back to Paris, closed up shop, and went to London and joined staff. And
Oh, wow.
that was it. I was, I am in. I am definitely all in with this material.
But today we don't have those facilities. We don't have the orgs where somebody can walk in and even, they give about the same kind of treatment because they walk into a Scientology org today and they're going to be, you need a lifetime membership in order to do anything here. But
the joke in those days, and for a long time, all there was getting up the bridge, get trained, get trained, get trained. Training is the road out, which is absolutely the truth of it. And then, of course, it changed in the early 80s when they destroyed the mission network and so forth. But then the agenda was no longer Scientology. The agenda became end this game. This is the only game that is in the way of the deep state. We have to get rid of these people. move them out of the way. And that was the sort of.
I'm glad you say that, because I've had that opinion too, that for a long time, that, Scientology had to be taken out. Like I said, about the remote viewing proof testing. There you have it. That cannot be allowed to just wander freely around the planet and free people. Freeing people is a very dangerous thing. That has not been liked. That has not been well thought of down the whole track, free
And
beings.
particularly, David, this is a very good point that you make, but it's particularly true that the whole thing started in Washington when LRH, when two people walked in separately who had both been, if you will, recruited in bars to this MK Ultra program. They had both been given medication, put to sleep, taken back to the facility and treated. And LRH discovered this because this incident came up in their Dianetic session. And he's got two of them. No, he just doesn't have one, he has two of them, and they were handled exactly the same way. So that's when he wrote his letter to the president at the time, which was John F. Kennedy. Said, sir, you have an operation going on in your government that I'm sure you're not familiar with, but this is the results of it. Now, the church doesn't want somebody knowing what the hell or the CIA doesn't want somebody knowing what the hell they're doing. And they want to know, how did Hubbard know that we're doing this?
Yeah, that was a threat. That was another big threat. The fact that he could pull that, what's called the brainwashing, pain drug and hypnosis, undo that. Dianetics was a threat from day one.
Yeah, they knew they have to get rid of this guy. So they raided the church 10 days later in Los Angeles and Washington. They took all the materials and they made a study of it. And they said, okay, these are the things we have to change in the church to bring it to its needs. And then they set out with the infiltration and so on, isolating Ron and doing all these various things by putting their own staff in this whole infiltration. And then, which again gets into the whole drama. Okay, I'm not interested in undoing that drama because the Central Intelligence Agency is the best there is at what they do. And what they're doing is suppressing things. I would just like to cut straight to the rub.
Well, let's get back to Joe. Joe read the book like you, but in this day and age, we don't want to send him to one of those crapola organizations. So he's on his own. He says, I want to do something with this. I want to learn more about it, or I want to, help other people. Does he find a seminar? Does he, what the hell is the future for guys like that? Because I see them all the time. Like I said, they come into the Facebook group. I get emails from people that have seen one of my videos or found something on the Scientolopedia website. I'm a little stumped. I say, well, we've got a list of auditors on there. There's some 50 auditor resources listed on Scientolopedia, but that's not much. They're scattered around the world. They're not like in the major metropolitan areas necessarily. So when you take 50 and sprinkle them around the world, you can be hundreds, thousands of miles away from the nearest guy who could give you a Dianetic session. So
that's true. That's true. But what you can do with folks is have them read a book. Because here's an interesting thing. Obviously, education has been fully destroyed as part of this whole quote unquote conspiracy. People can't read a book anymore. It's like, Jesus. This was inspired this series of books that I'm writing. But with seminars, online seminars, you can walk people step by step through simple procedures, and they can get an awful lot done on their own by learning this material the way I did. When I read the first 40 pages of Dianetics, and I was up at the student mall at the university, and I was auditing people, not very successfully. I had some rather interesting experiences doing that. I got one girl who was sitting there and I'm asking the questions right out of the book. And she's going through some stuff. And I don't have my PRs, and I'm not really in communication at all, but I'm just trying to help. And eventually I needed to get up and just kind of walk away from her. I hope everything turns out okay. And I was very happy to later read that the case opened is better than the case left closed, because her case was definitely open and it was spilling out all over the student. I'm going, okay, I think I'm going to make a distance from this girl. But I couldn't believe the amount of mental crap flying out of this woman after a few questions. I'm going, okay, I'm accessing here. I just didn't know what to do with it. If I had read further in the book, I wouldn't know what to do with it. But there's nothing like just grabbing your butt cheeks, David, and jump in there. Give it a go.
There's a later lecture, LRH. In fact, they're in video form, the Clearing Congress lectures. And in one of those, I don't remember which one, there's about 6 of them. LRH says, well, the first thing is, key element to auditing before anything is you got to have some courage.
Yeah.
It takes a little guts. And I would add willingness, like it's one thing to see, oh yeah, Joe over there, he's screwed up. He can't get along with his wife and his kids are whacked and whatever. But another thing is to step in and, have the courage to try to do something, to try to help, and the willingness to try to help. So, but there are, I keep getting, I go from cynical about the future of like the next generations to getting inspired. And I come across young people or people that, they originate things about, their life and what they're doing and how they're taking care of their family or how they want to, do this or that in their futures. So I think we're in good hands as far as the quality of the people still, but we don't have a real channel to help them with. And, people need to be able, like you found a channel, you could step into a building, a brick and mortar building. I did the same thing. I read the book. I reached out, find the closest org, and I was able to walk in through some doors into a building where the people were all about that subject. Yeah. Today, we don't have that. People are out there, even in a major metropolitan area, they do not have a portal, a doorway they can walk through where there's other people like-minded or who are more experienced than them or know more about the subject than themselves. So that's kind of my concern and what I continually look at and keep going back to. And I know we're not going to solve it today, but I'm just, maybe if somebody's listening to this or watching it, at least knowing that we understand that that's an issue and we're trying to puzzle it out because, it's a crazy situation. We got this whacked out organization that, like you say, it's worthless, just chuck it. We got this incredible body of work, this incredible subject that can change your life dramatically. Now we got to figure out how do we get Joe to be able to experience that body of work. And reading books is one, certainly. We offer them all of LRH's books for free download on Scientolopedia, in electronic form. But anyway, we're not going to solve it all. I'm just posing the problem.
To this point.
Situation.
Well, I mean, it would be useful to point out at this point that it already has been solved. All the research has been done. All of the stuff is there. What needs to be solved is the accessibility. How do we bring people to a point where they're actually having wins immediately? And to this point, we actually did something a few years back that was extremely successful all over the planet. And that was to go out into public areas. You could be on the ground with pillows or chairs and sit chairs knee to knee and sit on one and have a little sign there that says, please sit in front of me for 5 minutes without wiggling. And people would come up and say, yeah, I'll give it a go. And that attracts a crowd. They're going, what are they doing? And now there's 10 people in a circle. We've had 150 people out in Venice, St. Mark's Square.
You did this yourself? This is something you did actually?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Well,
I mean, I was one of all these people who are doing it, but it's something that can be done very easily, and it's so much fun to watch what happens to people. You just sit down in the chair, hands on your knees, and notice this person in front of you for 5 minutes. Don't say anything, nothing. You have people bursting into tears and laughing hysterically. And then at the end, they always get up and they embrace. It's just the best way to spend the day. You just can't imagine it. It seems this is just too simple. Yes, it is simple. And that's what we need more of. We need simple. The world begins with that simple little exercise.
Yeah.
You can't believe what it's like to sit in front of another person and just look at them for 5 minutes without trying to be interesting or doing anything weird. Just sit there and notice the person. It was continually mind-blowing to see the amount of positive change that occurred.
Yeah.
And people exchanging cards, and it's just more communication, not less, is the way out of this. Get people communicating at the bottom and get them working. Just sitting there in a chair is the first point of communication, being able to look at another person.
Well, I think also even a preliminary step is we got to get people interested in, doing something with the subject. The narrative that's been pumped out by the Rinders and Reminis and Delacarriers and Rathbuns and all those people, is that it's a cult, it's terrible, it'll harm you, you'll get brainwashed or whatever. And of course, big fat lie there. It's no differentiation. But if we counter that narrative and we find people who are brave enough or willing to do something like you're talking about, then people can have wins with the subject. And invariably they do have wins, and
yeah,
they want to take it a step further. Okay, why do I get upset every time with my wife when she asks me if I want to have broccoli for dinner? Why is this? And the person's aware that there's illogic, there's, aberrative stuff going on with them, or he sees it in others, but he doesn't know what to do. How do we train them, or how does he learn how to use Dianetics as a tool to fix those kind of things? It's a rhetorical question, because I know we're not going to come up with the answers here, but that's the type of thing that, are part of the situation on this planet is still, people are aberrated, and they want to get some freedom from the things that gnaw at them. And sitting down like you're talking about, have some fun keying out, experiencing that, is a great idea. But what are other ideas? What can we do?
There's no but to it. And I'll tell you why. And I put this challenge to anybody watching this broadcast. If you can sit down in a chair in front of another person, whether you know them or not, just sit down in front of a chair. Both of you just notice each other and do that for an hour. Now, many things, many things will happen. First of all, you won't be able to do it. Oh, this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. Yeah, exactly. You can't do it. Yeah. It's so simple. It's so dead simple. But, okay, so what's going to happen now? And they immediately want to make it complex. Their entire life is so bloody complex. They cannot sit down in front of another person and just notice them for an hour. I guarantee you, as you watch this blog, I'm telling you this to be honestly the truth. If you can just sit there for an hour and just be very comfortably there, don't do anything to be interesting, just be comfortably there, and you can do that for an hour, you're going to notice your whole life changes. You're going to notice strangers come up to you on the street and say, do I know you from someplace? And they're going to do anything to start a conversation with you. This was happening to us all the time on the pilot. I mean, we were having truly remarkable experiences just walking down the street. But never mind that the marriage settles down and you haven't learned another damn thing. Just be there comfortably in front of another person for 1 hour. I guarantee you your life will change. Don't do anything else. You don't have to figure anything out or, Nothing. Just sit there and notice. This is the experience that we had. It's so
Oh, come
simple.
on. Come on, Shreff. It can't be that simple. Come on. You got to be pulling my leg here.
I can't imagine how many times Ron Hubbard himself said that. It can't be this simple. Oh, it really is. It really is this simple. And he discovered it. And now he's just trying to say, everybody, look, the world begins with TR0, training routine 0. Sit on a chair and do nothing. Just be there comfortably and face another person. Yes,
how are we going to make any money doing that? I mean, there's no money in it, is there?
Listen, when you bring relief to people, they'll figure out how to make you money. You don't have to worry about that. They'll be throwing, would you come in and do this with my staff? Would you come in and do this, blah, blah, blah. Suddenly it'll be counseling marriages. And what you do to counsel a marriage is you get the husband and the wife to sit down in chairs facing. And you sit there and you watch them, watch each other. Do that for an hour.
I'm just being the devil's advocate. I have experienced what you're talking about. I've done a lot of those drills, and it does put you in a different spot as far as how you look at the world, how you look at other people, how you understand yourself better, how you just make things flow easier in your life because you're in a more serene spot. And it's not meditation, but maybe what you might think would happen if you were this exalted, meditator, but it's an amazing phenomena that does happen. So I like your suggestion of just getting people to do that. Simplicity could be very powerful and life-altering, life-changing by doing so.
David, it's certainly been my experience that greater simplicity is greater communication. And nothing is simpler than sitting on a chair in front of a mate and nothing else. Just do that. Because you'd be amazed how many of your communications begin because you just feel uncomfortable. You feel like you have to say something. Oh, how are you? And what's your name? And all blah, 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 and off onto the social circuitry. But there's no communication going on. If all you did was sit and relax, well, that would be my advice for the day.
Well, that's great advice. And, I was going to ask you about what can people do? That was the second part. We sort of, the church junk, forget it, but what do people do? There are going to be people listening, and anyway, that's a great idea of something that they could do. I wanted to ask you, because it kind of bleeds into that, but what's your, on a 1 to 10, or how would you rate your optimism for the subject of Scientology and for, quote unquote, Scientology? A lot of people think, well, it's just going to dwindle, it should be smashed, and obviously those are the people that we've been talking about earlier. But the subject that has this tremendous benefit, how do you view the future of it? I mean, or do you think about that, or are you concerned about it? Are you optimistic? How do you feel?
I'm extremely optimistic because the technology is the technology. It doesn't change. Here it is. This is, if you drop this, it falls to the table. There's nothing to even have an argument about or a discussion about. Scientology is the study of knowledge, or the study of knowing how to know. I'm completely confident that this is the road out for anybody who's interested, but not everybody will be. There's an awful lot of people that have become so critical and so cynical that, well, okay, that's fine. Do whatever you do. I don't have any concern about it one way or the other. My experience with Scientology is my own experience. As Ron said, if it's not true for you, it's not true. Mm-hmm. And people say, well, what would Ron Hubbard think about this? I don't care what Ron Hubbard thinks about this. I'm interested in what I think about this. What do I see for myself to be true? That is my entire yardstick of comparative knowledge. I compare it against my own universe. Does this make sense to me? When I was in India, excuse me, I had experiences there that were so mind-boggling that I couldn't believe it. And I thought, wait a minute, I don't have to believe anything. What I saw is something that I saw. I stopped fighting myself. Well, this couldn't have happened. Well, who knows? Maybe it didn't, but I think it did. I saw it. That's what occurred for me.
Yeah, I'm going to answer my own question because a famous person, very smart person, me, in a video a number of years ago, I asked, people ask, well, what's the future of Scientology? And my answer was, well, the future is whatever you choose to do with it. If you don't want to do anything with it, that's fine. That's your future of Scientology, is nothing, If you decide you want to use some of it or read more or learn more or apply it to others, then that's your future. So we don't have to solve, this big question, is the church going to, expand or contract or fail or whatever, or is the subject going to be on your future of Scientology, as far as you're concerned, is whatever you're going to do with it. So it kind of gets down to there. It's a very personal thing.
That's right. And people need to have their own purpose for studying it. They need to have something they'd like to resolve themselves. But as Ron said, all problems are problems of communication. I fully get what he's talking about there, and I agree with it myself because I've seen it happen. I was on the street one time in Clearwater, Florida. We were on a break, going back to the other facility for our lunch break. And there's a whole group of us standing there. We were all chatting amongst ourselves, very excitable. And this lady from town walked up next to me, and she's got a little bonnet on, a little Clearwater citizen. And she had this little net of, something down in front of her face. She was probably 60, 65, something like that.
I've seen those type of hats.
Yeah. Well, she was standing there next to her little shopping bag. And I looked over at her, and she looked up at me. And as soon as our eyes met, she burst into tears. She dropped her bag and said, "My daughter's leaving next week, and I don't know what I'm going to do." Burst out into tears, and she's just bawling. Now, mind you, this is a group of trained technicians who are now really working on communication and stuff. And they saw that this woman had started this communication cycle with me. And they went quiet. The light changed. This whole group moves across the street. And I'm standing there with this lady. And she's just, and so I did the natural thing. I said, "Tell me more about that." And she did. She went on, and she's, "Well, this and this and this and this and this and this and this." I don't even know how long we were there, but she was suddenly really into blah, 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 blah. And then she had a realization. My daughter left 6 months ago. She left 6 months ago. I can't believe that I'm still blah, 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 blah. And she was having these realizations that no, she's not leaving next week. She left 6 months ago, and she has been in this incident all this time. And this all happened on the street. And she actually hugged me and said, "You're a very nice young man. What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm a Scientologist. I'm here training on some course." She says, "We hear a lot about Scientology here. What is it anyway?" And I said, "Well, why don't you come and have lunch with me, and I'll tell you all about it." Wow. And she said, "That would be wonderful." And she picked up her bag, and we went down into the Fort Harrison, and we had a very nice lunch. She was just a delightful lady, and her whole life had changed.
Well, you're a master disseminator, my friend. That's a great story.
We all are. When we go into communication, because everybody wants to help. Everybody wants to help. It's a very fundamental impulse. They just don't know how. Well, the way you communicate with people is you communicate with them. That's the way you help them. Do you listen to them? You really understand what they're saying. You acknowledge them and so forth, and the whole world gets better.
Yeah.
It's that simple, David. I'm not trying to save the world. I'm just trying to have a conversation with that guy right there. And when that happens, things start to roll, because he's going to go back and he's going to say, "I had a very interesting conversation with somebody today." And that's just going to roll right to the community.
Yeah. Anyway. Well, I have no doubt that if we could get, a football stadium full of people and just have them sit across and observe the person across from them for an hour, pretty soon the world would be different in a massive way, because that would branch out in many football stadiums around the world. And, potentially we could all be in much better communication.
That's exactly right. I couldn't agree with you more, my friend. And I'll tell you, we're never more than 6 people removed from every other person on the planet. So if you just learn how to have a conversation with one other person, a really fine conversation, pretty soon you're on an airplane with somebody who owns stadiums, who operates in a very large scale. Say, listen, could I convince you to come and talk to, this is how I got this event in New Zealand with 2,500 attendees. It was after a simple conversation. And it's like, that makes a lot of sense. We're just doing this big event, and that's the way it happens. You don't think about filling stadiums. You just think about having conversations with people and being interested in them. And suddenly you're interested, and the right guy comes along and he's going, okay, what you have is what I want to have and what I want everybody to have. How do we do that? And
well, hopefully somebody listening to this, or many people listening or watching this, will, feel some inspiration and some hope that, they can do something and do something effective and have some wins and, just get along a little better. I'm going to wind down here, but it's been great talking to you more about all this. And, I appreciate you taking the time to share your wisdom and your experiences, both on part 1 and on part 2. So folks, buy his book. The link is below. It's Sacrificial Branches is the name of the book. It's on Amazon. You can find that, and support this channel. And thank you for tuning in. Shreff, thank you, my friend. It's great talking to you. And
thank you, David, for providing everybody with the opportunity to communicate a little more. This is fantastic. Thank you for your work.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of fun. I love, talking about this subject, and hopefully it does, inspire some people to do some things.
Awesome. I'm sure it has.
All right. Well, take care, my friend, and have safe travels back home. And maybe we'll do this again. We'll come up with some more stuff to talk about, I'm sure.
I look forward to it, my friend. Take care of yourself.
Bye.